Miller and married a Miller.
Welcome to Reality Coaching for Writers, where we have, Diana, what do we have?
No fluff, just the real stuff to help you succeed.
That's right. And today we've got Maureen Miller as our guest. And Diana, I'm going to let you introduce Maureen and let our listeners know what they're in store for today.
Okay, the question that we're going to answer today is, how can a writer position themselves to be in a place where open doors of opportunity will come their way? So Maureen is a great example of that. She's a wonderful, I like to call friend. She's a contributor for Inspire a Fire, which is a site that I help, I'm a managing editor of. And I've also known her from several writers' conferences. So I look forward to introducing you to more about Maureen. Let's say she lives on a hobby homestead nestled in the beautiful mountains of Western North Carolina with her husband, Bill, and 3 children of her heart that they've adopted. And Maureen, sorry, I have many friends, Marlene's. Maureen, you have a really awesome one-line kind of expression for your writing. You said you like to take spirit-breathed ideas and frame them with words. That's really beautiful. How did you come up with that concise kind of mission statement for yourself?
That's a good question, because it actually originally was worded slightly different, but I was meeting because I believe in meeting and having mentors to guide us. And I was meeting with my dear friend who is a mentor to me, Lori Rolleveld, as a coach. And she was helping me kind of formulate some of the way my blog, All About Me portion went. And she suggested, because so much of what my life revolves around and what I'm gearing toward with regard to my upcoming novel that's still a work in progress, has to do with looking through a window. And so she helped me change my wording slightly to use the word frame. And it really has to do with the fact that I want to position myself first and foremost before the feet of my Father, before the throne room, and just ask him to guide me in my endeavors and to open up doors of opportunity, and then with his leading walk through those. And so it's kind of the idea of a door or a window and being able to see beyond and look to God first and foremost before we walk through. So that's kind of what inspired those words.
It's beautiful. Eddie and I like to encourage writers to write a mission statement, and I just love that. And so you've been in love with words since you were a child.
I have, really. And it's funny, ironically, I just not long ago had a phone conversation with a high school English teacher who very much inspired my writing, even if sometimes what he did was discourage me with all those red marks on the paper, but it really just helped guide me and point me in the right direction to birth a dream, which I would say I have essays and little poems that I wrote when I was just barely able to hold a pen. And just as I grew, I just continued to look for ways to translate my thoughts. Oftentimes my way of looking at the world with words. And so it's been a long-term and a very lifelong pursuit in a lot of ways.
So Maureen,
go ahead.
I was going to ask you, you mentioned writing opportunities. So maybe give the listeners a little bit of a backstory. I was looking at your bio. You were at Blue Ridge, I think, the same year I was there, 2005 and maybe 2004, right? So maybe give the listeners a little bit of a background of what the opportunities have looked like for you early on in your writing career.
Okay. Well, I do think it was 2004, 5, 6 that I first attended Blue Ridge, and have been there a number of times. I'm a commuter usually, so I miss out on a lot of the evening activities because I don't live that far away. But for me, as an aspiring writer and someone who has pursued this for many years, it really, I can't underestimate the the power of conferences, writers' retreats, and making connections, prayerfully asking God to guide you as you attend these sorts of conferences, that He will place your path along the path of someone else. And I can say, Eddie, that I think I met you maybe for the very first time there, and then again at boot camp, which is now the Asheville Christian Writers Conference at Montreat. And just you and Cindy Sproles and others just really always encouraging us to seek the Lord more than our own agenda as we go forth into these conferences. And that's that is very much a key that I would want to share with others that are wanting to write God's messages, is make sure that you're prayerfully asking Him to guide your steps. And so along those lines, conferences like that, Right to Publish, which I attended a couple times as well, and the connections I've made over the years, they've just been so powerful for the doors that God has opened through.
Diana, did you have something you were going to jump in and say?
I was just going to say, you talk about God-nections, God connections, that divine, I call them divine appointments, but you mentioned in particular how Cecil Murphy spoke a word into you at one of the conferences, and it ended up being quite timely because you had a lot of life interruptions come in and interrupt your writing plans. And so you hearkened back to that word that Cease had shared with you, and you took advantage of, even though your life interrupted things, you remembered those words of Cease's. So could you share them and then just share how that influenced your writing path?
Absolutely. Thank you. In 2007, I attended Right to Publish in Wheaton, Illinois, and Cecil Murphy was the keynote speaker there. And he was very recently had ghostwritten the 90 Minutes in Heaven with, I believe, a Piper. I can't remember his first name.
John Piper.
John Piper, yes. And he said something then, because God had birthed a dream in me in that same year, a little bit earlier, for a book, a fiction work. And I knew that I wanted to pursue this story, and I went to Right to Publish just with all kinds of goals, a one page that was poorly written. But he said something in one of his keynotes. He said that no matter where we are in our writing journey, maybe we're working on something, but we have a brain freeze, we get writer's block. He said, continue finding ways to hone your craft. And I had never heard that before. And the idea of honing our craft, and first that writing was even a craft, and that I could call that my craft, that there was something beautiful about that I discovered at that conference. And then the idea of honing it, to tailor it, to continue pursuing it. And so when I came home from that conference, having shared my one page with someone from Tyndale and believing I was going to come home and write that book, like you said, Diana, so many things got in the way. We had a failed adoption of a child we'd been with for a year. My husband had some health issues that really we weren't sure how what the end here on earth was going to look like. And so that book did not get written. And during that time, and that waiting time of pushing more forward with this story that God birthed in my heart, I did find just various ways to hone my craft, and those words never left me. I started writing for a couple different Christian publications. I started trying my hand occasionally at some devotions, other venues of devotional writing, and then started writing off and on for our local newspaper, as well as for the faith section and some human interest stories in our local newspaper. And I just continued to try to find ways and open doors to do what Cease Murphy encouraged, which was to hone my craft. And that's what I did for all those years until 2019, when I went to Right to Publish again and met with someone and signed a contract with Redemption Press and Athena Dean Holtz to really pursue the completion of my work in progress, my novel, which is Gideon's Book is what it's called.
And when is your proposed release date for that? Do you have a proposed release date?
Well, I am hoping to, just do lots of edits. I have a manuscript already, but I'm going back to the drawing board because, and I'll just say, as part of honing my craft, during the season when I hit send on my first draft in 2020 and COVID hit, and there were so many books being, Redemption Press was getting bombarded with books. Everybody was writing a book, and I was waiting for some edits and some returns so I could really work on my story. And in the waiting, I continued to hone my craft by finding different venues and the good God-nections that God gave me. God was opening doors of different ways to publish. And so with that, I set the book aside for a season. And when I've come back to it now, I'm really I've honed my craft in the meantime. And I've really learned what I didn't know then, which is to really write a better fiction story. So I just met with my new content coach. Her name is Liz Telsma, which I'm so thrilled to be getting ready to work with her. And my projected date for release is 2025. It might be sooner, but I'm really hoping that it will be 2025, and I'm really trusting God for the birth of this book.
Well, and I just wanted our listeners to understand that your vision for this book came in like 207, 2007. 2007. So look at all the time that's passed, but you had that vision and now it's coming to fruition because you've stayed the course, you've done, what you needed to do, and now you're going to realize that dream. It was delayed, but here it's going to happen.
Yes. And I have to just say, 2007 does seem so long ago, and I'm not going to say that I never got discouraged along the journey, especially because we had some bumps in the road that just really were difficult. But I really have to say that God is so good and so faithful, and my book touches on some specific issues of morality and some issues theologically that I have to believe that God has a perfect timing for this book. And I go back to that saying that many of you have said, and I've heard said so many times, which is we really do aim to write for that audience of one. I mean, God is the one that I want to please the most. But if I reach one person through my story or through what I write, that has to be enough. And so if my book, when it comes out, touches a life and perhaps even goes as far as to save a life that God has a perfect plan for, which I believe he does, then that will be enough for me. And I love the Psalm from, it's Moses' Psalm, Psalm 90, verse 17. So a prayer that I make often to the Lord is, establish the work of my hands for me, establish the work of my hands. And it starts out by saying, and may the favor of the Lord rest upon us. And so that is a passage that I claim so often because I want my words and my work to be according to his perfect plan.
Yeah, when you were talking a minute ago about Cease's advice of honing the craft, I was thinking back to something Al Gansky said back probably around 2005 when we were at the Blue Ridge Conference. And you've heard it before. A writer's one of their main muscles, but probably their primary muscle, is their butt. They have to get that butt exercised into the seat. It actually be sitting down. That you have to start there, and then you have to get your fingers working. And Al was talking about. This was a tip that I continue to use today. He said, if you're starting to write whatever project you're on that day, and you're looking at the screen and just in panic, he said, just find a book, find anything, and just start typing it. Just look at it and start typing what you're reading, right? He said, just that simple exercise will get the brain, the fingers, and the mind moving. And then you'll scrap that and pick up the story you had and move on. And that is part of honing the craft. It's literally like a hammer, just getting that muscle memory going.
That's exactly right. I totally agree. And sometimes it's just getting a piece of paper and writing a note to someone. Sometimes it's about finding something else to write in that in between, but always writing, finding something to write every day.
So let's talk a little bit about microblogging, because that's something that I think in your bio, you said you've been working on that a little bit. Explain what microblogging is.
it's funny because I didn't even know that what I was doing had a term. And some years ago, I was attending a conference virtually. It was during COVID, and it was a Redemption Press She Writes for Him conference online. And I heard a friend of mine, a dear friend now, Christina Custodio, speak about microblogging. And I was like, that has a name. I didn't ever know that. But in 2011, we were in the process of possibly adopting another child that joined our family in 2012. But prior to that, again, as part of honing my craft, I had started writing microblogging, now is what I would call it, on Facebook, just stories. I think it started in the Advent season of 2011, right around Thanksgiving. And just I kind of followed this theme, and I did something little every day on Facebook, and I began to realize people were reading what I was writing, and all of what I was writing was positive, and oftentimes, if not all the time, was pointing back to Jesus and to God. And people were very much drawn to that. And then when our daughter joined our family in 2012, she was a toddler at the time. She just did and said the funniest things. And so I began doing Allieisms or allegories. Her name is Allie. And people just loved the stories I would tell. Now, mind you, today she'll tell me when she does something kind of quirky, she's like, don't tell everybody that, Mom, don't write about that. So I do honor that now. But when she was, 2, 3, 4, she gave me lots of good writing material. And so I microblogged about her. And now I just really, a lot of even the essays, so I've written a couple award-winning essays over the last couple of years. Sometimes they've been on my personal blog, and then I also believe in recycling things. And thankfully, you guys allow us to do that at Inspire a Fire, to recycle things we've written, or vice versa. I will write it for you guys, and then I'll share it on my own personal blog. But a couple of those essays started out really as things I had written on Facebook as microblogs, or at least portions of those, and then they evolved from there. So microblogging is really where you write a lengthier blog post on social media. My only venue is Facebook, and it's tell a story, or you share something in a little bit of a lengthier version on Facebook. It doesn't have to be really long. I don't know that there's a word count that defines it, but that's what microblogging is. It's blogging in that manner. At least that's the way I understand microblogging. And I'm so happy to have a name for what I did.
Well, that's good to know. I know Diana had
Yeah.
said before that I was a microblogger, and I still never knew what that meant. I mean, I couldn't. I assumed it was a compliment, but I couldn't tell. Really what. I think what I've always called it is pulling up a soapbox and standing on it and just kind of pontificating for a while, and then get back off the soapbox. And maybe somebody
That too.
Well, Maureen, you've used these opportunities. Some of the articles you've written, you've submitted to contests. And recently, at the most recent Blue Ridge Mountain Christian Writers Conference, you entered 2 of your articles into the SELA Awards, and you were SELA finalists with 2 of your articles. How did that turn out for you? Did you take a place in any of those?
It brings joy to be able to share the words that God gives you, of course, because you want to bring Him glory. But I have to admit, before I thought, well, I'm just going to be honest with you guys. I have to always hold things loosely and ask the Lord to sometimes take away if there's something I want to write about and it's not His will for me, that He'll just tell me no. Or sometimes I go to type and I use those butt and finger muscles, like you said, Eddie, and I realize this is like going through sludge. It's not for me, and I just have to stop. And sometimes, I'll be honest, I've pushed on through, and it ends up being drudgery. And I just pray that God will somehow be glorified in it anyway. But I guess what I'm saying is there's a little bit of a competitive edge to me. In sports in high school, I had a little bit of a competitive edge. I still have a little bit of a competitive edge, and I do enjoy a contest. Of course, there's something wonderful about being recognized by your peers for the things that you have worked so hard with God's help to do. But I also don't ever want it to become idolatry, so I have to be careful. But I was really just honored to have, and again, this is a redemptive story, because we do believe Romans 8:28, that God works together all things for the good of them that love Him and are called according to His purposes. But 2 stories that started with heartbreak but ended in beauty are the articles that I wrote and had a 2nd and a 3rd place SELA award for. One is about the death of the dream for biological children way back in the early 1990s, and how God redeemed that by bringing us our 3 born in our heart children, starting with our oldest son, Ian, through adoption, and just miraculously how he did that. And that story actually is in this book, Radical Abundance, that came out earlier. I guess it came out last year with Teresa Jansen, and it's called This Time Next Year. And I was honored to have that win a 3rd place Selah. And then the other article, there was an article in print and was actually, I believe, at Inspire a Fire as well as in my personal blog, but it was in print, physical print in our local newspaper here in Haywood County, North Carolina. It's called Freedom and Forgiveness, and it's about the loss of that child that we had for that year in 2007 to 2008, and how God just really had to work in my heart to forgive the person who took her back, and how God worked all that out. So I see so much redemption because these stories, though they were painful, they just point back to God's goodness and that he has a better way. And I'm just thrilled to be able to have people see that his fingers are in our lives, even in the hard times.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good.
Yeah. So
And
Maureen,
congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you.
Maureen, I'll jump in and tell you what I told Eva Marie, because she's always after us to enter in the Selah Awards, and I do, because it's a lot of times I do it because of Yvonne. She, because of the conference, and as long as she's anywhere recognized, I'm going to enter the Selahs. But I told Eva, she said, "Are you going to come to the awards?" I'm like, "No, I'm not coming to the awards this year." She goes, "Why not?" I said, I'm like you, there's the competitive part of me. I'm really competitive. I said, but I don't like being there. It's just not comfortable. Even if I win, it's not comfortable. It's not comfortable to win. It's not comfortable to lose. I would rather have my little award come to me. We share it together. Just the award, me, Jesus, our own little private party. But that being in the big audience, it's never been fun for me. So
Yeah.
I'm like, a little bit competitive in that way, I guess.
That's fun. And I hear you completely. So
yeah, and I think maybe I'm wrong about this, and I'll let you pick up, Diane, but I think Selah, I looked it up one time. I think it means breathe or take a breath. Is that right? Right.
Mm-hmm.
That our hobby farm that you mentioned, Diana, is Selah Farm, because when we sat on the porch prior to buying our property in 2001, there's a little stream that runs in front of it, and I heard the Lord say, "Be still and know that I am God." And at that point, I didn't even know that passage, when you look at it in the Bible, that passage ends with that phrase, the Hebrew word Selah or Selah, which means to stop, to ponder, to think about it. And we've prayed that this property would be a place where people can come and sense the Lord's presence and take a breath and pause. And so I love that word, and I love that name for the award, because it does so much speak the ways that so many of us Christian writers have to take pause before the Lord and say, what's on your heart today, God?
Yeah.
That's good.
Diane,
That's
what were you getting ready to jump in and say?
Well, and I was just thinking of the these God connections that you've made at the conferences, and how it's led to your connection with Redemption Press and Althena Holtz, but also with a guidepost opportunity. Could you just share that quickly with us?
Oh, yes. So I do believe in God-nections, and I could list them, and then I'm like, but if I list them, then I'm going to forget somebody, and I don't want to do that, because God's been so good to connect me with so many beautiful people, including you guys. And I just believe that that's a beautiful fruit of walking in his ways. But a very dear friend of mine, who I will keep anonymous, was writing for Guidepost, All God's Creatures. And I am a lover of animals and God's creation. It's just my heart. And she was going to be stepping down from her writing with them after some time. And she knew me and knew my writing. And she just sent me the guidelines and said, "Taylor, a couple devotions according to these guidelines. When I step down, I would love to offer your name as a person to possibly fill my spot. They may have a waiting list and maybe that won't happen, but it's worth a shot. And so I did that. I wrote a couple devotions according to the guidepost, All God's Creatures, the submission guidelines. And she included those in this email to the editor at the time. And I will tell you, I had taken every course that Guidepost offered online. I sent queries according to their instruction, but whatever was going on, I was just coming up against dead ends. And it was a dream, not because Guidepost is the end all be all of every Christian publication, but I loved Guidepost as a little girl. And my mom would read stories to us from the magazine and the Christmas editions and so forth. So I always kind of aspired to maybe write for them one day. And sure enough, not long after she stepped down, I received an email asking me, inviting me to write for All God's Creatures. So I'm contracted for 24 and next year, now 2 years from now, 2025, and just submitted 8 devotions for the 2025 edition and a couple other collaboratives that Guideposts have put out or are putting out, including the Pray a Word a Day, which is a wonderful little devotional. But I am just thrilled, and I just give God all the glory for those God-nections in my life.
That's
Yes,
awesome.
and
Yeah.
it's such a, that's the thing. And Eddie and I, we always are encouraging writers to take advantage of conferences, but also writers critique groups and word weavers like you're involved in, and Denise Locke's writing group at Lake Junaluska. I mean, there's so many opportunities to gather with other writers, and in those connections, they might know somebody that knows somebody. And that's the way God works. We're a family, all of us in the body of Christ, and he loves to bless us and use his kingdom. And he does it so often through the connections and people we've got to meet and to know. Do we have time, Eddie, for one more question?
Well, I was just going to make a final comment about the Guidepost thing, Maureen, because the way you ended that was you had said that you read it as a child, right? Right. And I think that's kind of, for me, that's kind of key to what you said, because you aren't just writing for them as part of a platform building. This is not just something to check off a list and move on up. This is something you actually enjoy. You actually enjoy the publication, and it's an honor to be there, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's something as writers we need to keep in mind. If we're only writing to get our work out there so that it can elevate our exposure, but we don't really care about the company, the publication, the editor, if we're just doing it purely just for ourselves, I mean, people will still be blessed, but I don't think we're going to get the blessing. And in your case, it's like Jesus jumped down and said, "This is a double whammy. Everybody's going to win on this." And I just think that's great. That's why I said it's awesome. But yeah, we have time for one more question.
Time for one more. Oh, I wanted to say one thing for those that might know Michelle Medlock Adams. I was so tickled to find out she was your aerobics instructor at Asbury College. That just delighted me because I just adore her. I adore her. I think she's just a brilliant woman, but that just tickled me.
Yeah, I kept sitting there thinking, how do I know her? And finally we figured it out.
Well, and the question that I would like to end with is, you feel called to also help others because you've received help. And so tell them what that looks like for you, and maybe it'll encourage our listeners to also consider ways they can contribute and help and assist other writers.
I'm glad we get to end here because this is my heart. It truly, truly is. And this was inspired by not only a generous upbringing, my parents being generous, a very generous husband who I'm married to, but C.S. Murphy again in 2007. That was one thing that he encouraged, and he continues to encourage even into his 90s, that you want to come alongside other writers and help them. And if I can't do that, then I really would just, I think, stop doing it altogether. So for me, what it looks like is being part of book launches, for example. Cindy Sproul's new coming book, This is Where It Ends. I'm on that book launch. I love to work on book launches. I love to write personal blog posts that feature authors. I love to do giveaways. So to order a person's book and then offer it as a giveaway on my blog or on Facebook sometimes. I love to just verbally encourage and pray for writers as needs arise. I hosted a writers retreat for regional ladies back in September. We had about 15 of us that gathered here on Selah Farm, and we continue to have a Facebook group where we share our prayer requests and text one another. And so just encouraging that way. Being part of some groups that they make that their mission to encourage writers, just being a part of that and finding ways to do that. I just always want to be about coming alongside and helping. And with the writers groups I'm a part of, like you mentioned, Denise Locks at the Lake, Junaluska here in Haywood County, and also our new Maggie Valley Word Weavers, just to come alongside, not only be critiqued, and but to offer critique and just words of encouragement and offer opportunities, because a lot of times as writers we're aware of opportunities. In fact, I've shared multiple times with many writers here that Inspire a Fire looks for writers, and so just sharing with others, never hoarding it and holding on to it for our own gain, but always holding things loosely and prayerfully allowing God to open doors of opportunity for others brings me so much joy.
That's great.
Well, that's beautiful. Thank you, Maureen. It's been such a delight to have you here with us.
My pleasure.
We just celebrate you and the gifts God's given you and all that you're doing with it.
Thank you. God is glorified, I hope, and I just am honored to be with you all today.
All right. Thank you, Maureen. We'll talk with our listeners next week.
Thank you so much.
Okay, have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.